Welcome everyone to Growth Uncut. This is a podcast where we get different people from around the world talking about how we can upgrade justice under the banner, umbrella, symbol of Justice 2.0. I am so pleased to have Denise here to talk with us today, and I'm going to ask her to introduce herself and what she does. So over to you, Denise. Lovely to have you here.
Thank you so much, Sarah. I really appreciate being invited. It's wonderful you're doing this. My name is Denise Michelle Brend. I am a professor at Université Laval in Quebec City, Canada. It's a French university, and I am in the criminology program. I got into this work because I came from a personal background of poverty, and I had a lot of friends and a lot of situations in which criminality was necessary and normal. And as I started to think about ways that I could improve my own life and have more safety and security, I started seeing how so many systemic issues create the conditions in which people have almost no choices. And this really put a fire under me to try to do something about that. And so I was a social worker for a long time and also became a psychotherapist. And I was mainly working with people who had anger and externalizing symptoms, we call it, so violence, so people who were court ordered. And I did that for many, many years. And two things that I take from that work that I find really inform everything I do. One was that when I was in the room with 8 men who had been considered so terribly dangerous and who were terribly dangerous at certain points, that they had to come in and receive these services to really look at that specific issue, I felt very safe with those men once I understood how to connect with them. And when I heard their stories and how things happened to them, I honestly was shocked that they were not more violent. That was the big message of my helping professional career, was that as human beings, we are lucky as heck as a society that people are so resilient, because what people suffer through is quite phenomenal. And generally speaking, people do better than honestly you'd imagine would be possible. So after that, I started to feel like I couldn't move enough change. And so I was working with individuals and groups, but I was like, but there's still these systemic things that really bother me. And one of the things I was often confronted with colleagues or in the stories of the people with whom I worked was how the people that served them were sometimes not very nice, or sometimes not very professional, or sometimes didn't have very good boundaries. And I was like, what is that all about? And I think that, like everybody, I took on, well, that's because we're not good enough kind of thing. And then I was like, hold the phone here. This is another one of these things where there's probably some systemic issues going on that's setting people up for failure. And so I went back to do my PhD, and I looked at the impact of trauma on the helping relationship. And it was super fascinating. And then I did a postdoc where I designed a trauma-informed care program with a nonprofit organization and my supervisor. And this has now been implanted across our province in almost every territory. And I don't even remember how many places. So I'm really excited and proud. And we've done some research to evaluate it and watching how it's doing, and it's doing some nice work. And when I got into criminology, I really pitched that I was wanting to look at well-being from the perspective of all systems actors, and then systemic conditions that create problems. And so trauma-informed care for me has been one of the best models and philosophies that I've found that really responds to a lot of the issues that I've seen throughout my life and throughout my professional career. And it seems like the best bet we have for improving things kind of for all actors within the system, which we need to do if we're going to really make lasting change. We can't fix it for one actor and everyone else is in a terrible position. It's just going to degrade over time. So that was a really long answer.
It was a lovely answer. It was a lovely answer. And it's just lovely to hear you talk about looking at it from systems perspective. And I had a conversation last week about when we think about our reform movement, we need to think about, how does it impact me? How does it impact a member of the public? What's in it for me? If we're going to have prison reform, if we're going to do trauma-informed care, if we're going to do Justice 2.0, what am I going to get from that? Because that's the world we kind of live in. And, it's interesting because I kind of think about the logical argument, if we're more effective, we're going to reduce violence, and we're going to increase kind of compassion, and we're going to reduce potentially reoffending. But is that something that the average Joe wants to hear and needs to hear? And how might we change that view and that idea that system actors, if we do it for all of them, that is going to impact everyone, isn't it, along the way, because we all know maybe someone who has been impacted by the justice system, whether they have experienced it directly or indirectly. But it needs to be personal for me. In order for us to change it collectively, it needs to be personal. It's lovely to hear your personal journey to that point, and it's lovely to have you as an advisor on Justice 2.0. I guess for me, there's something about your why. So, and it seems quite evident now in light of what you said. But in terms of your why be part of Justice 2.0? Why be one of our lovely advisors? What drew you to it?
The approach. I think, to me, the answer of why are we doing any of this is because what is happening right now doesn't work well enough. And so, if I look at how crime is studied, the dial's been moved in a lot of ways for a lot of things, but it's not yet good enough. And so that's just the truth of the matter. And if what we've been doing so far hasn't solved the problem, then we need to do some new things. There's a colleague of mine who did a study, a 40-year retrospective study, looking at patterns of violent sexual offending in North America. And they found that there was an incredible decline. And the decline coincides with the changes in society's attitudes around service provision and what victims are. And so when you started getting women's shelters, when you started getting new approaches for trauma and a conceptualization of trauma that actually understood it as a result of an injury, when these things started coming in and the community groups started coming together and people were becoming empowered to join together, that's in history when we see a reduction in these types of crimes. And so, I feel like for me, it's just common sense also. Like, if you've known anyone who's had a hard time in their lives and who's come out of it, and you think about how they did it, it's usually not through punishment and more discomfort. We know there is somewhat of a deterrent effect. I don't want to take that away. And when I think about people who have experienced phenomenal and profound deprivation in their lives to the point where institutionalization is necessary, I kind of see prisons as an opportunity, because if you've had that level of disorganization and deprivation and violence in your life, to have a place where you can be contained temporarily to receive a different experience, to learn new ways of connecting, of trusting, of feeling safe, of trying out different behaviors in a sort of a safe, contained environment, to me, that's extremely exciting. So I know we're not there yet, but that's where I'd like us to go. I would like us to get to the point in our society where we have closed environments where people would volunteer to go. I'm not well.
Yeah, that's it. And it be led by them, right? Instead of things being done to them. I talk a lot with some of the guys in prison that talk about, I just go down the segregation unit to get a bit of headspace because it's so busy on the wing. I just need some time away. And it's kind of, in order to get down the segregation unit, I need to either be violent or abusive or commit some kind of harm in some kind of way. It's clear what that individual needs in light of the chaos that's around them.
An excellent example. I was speaking to a healthcare provider in one of our prisons, and she was saying that there are certain people who will fake illness or inflict self-harm to get into the healthcare center. And I don't know how it is in the UK, but in Canada, finding psychiatric care, mental health care, it's almost impossible. And it really is this reactive model. And, same with our youth protective and justice system, is reactive, reactive, reactive. What if we had proactive? There are people who would like to say, I don't have enough food. My life is really tough. I don't have a lot of options here. I need help. And to actually have that help available might prevent a lot of awful things from happening.
Yeah, absolutely. And I guess we talk a little bit about when life is chaotic, how we can maybe be preventative in nature. What role do you think relationships play when we're talking about operating, I guess, in quite chaotic environments like prison, for example? How important is connection and relationships? You touched a bit on it earlier, but tell me a bit more.
A couple of years back, I got really interested into what the main predictors of post-traumatic stress disorder are. And we have so many myths around what causes traumatization. And I think a lot of those myths are like me when I was like, well, maybe I'm not good enough. And people think, well, I'm not able to handle life, or I'm not strong enough, or I don't have resilience, which Resilience is not what we used to think it was. And there were a couple of meta-analyses, which for us researchers are like the biggest, most exciting studies. They have the best evidence on the planet. And the first predictor of PTSD is exposure to intense traumatic events. Like that's it. If you get hit by a bus, you're probably going to break some bones, right? So if you get hit by a huge trauma, you're probably going to get really hurt. And the second one, and these two are kind of far and above the other factors, was social support. If you had it, you were far less likely to develop a pathological post-traumatic reaction. If you didn't have it, you were far more likely. And so those two things for me always go together, that you cannot have one without the other, or you're going to be in trouble. And so social support and connection, in whatever form that takes, is phenomenally important. And I feel like in a lot of crimes, it's something that we miss. If your criminal behavior provides for you a social structure, then you're not going to want to lose your social structure, because that actually does protect you. That actually does make you more well. And so we have to think much more carefully about what we're asking people to do, or what we're demanding that they do, and the actual impacts on their lives. Because perhaps that change in behavior around crime is going to result in a far worse outcome when it comes to health and mental health. So connection for me is everything. Finding the people with whom you can regulate yourself, you can feel regulated, you can co-regulate, that feel good to you, is super, super important in any sphere of our lives.
And I guess looking at it from a research point of view, there's also something for me about, which we talked about earlier, around the importance of connecting and including different voices within research. Yeah. And for you, what does that look like if we were to enrich research, or if we were to upgrade research outcomes in terms of that knowledge? What do you see as important?
We would have people with lived experience of incarceration and judicialization sitting on the faculty of every criminology department in the whole wide world.
So,
yeah, I've got
what would that bring, do you think, if we had that?
I think just the direction of how thought is led in institutional settings. Professors are a lot like small business owners. We show up with our own interests and we follow our passions. It's the greatest job ever. But your passions and interests are driven by your experience. We all know that. That's pretty obvious. So I think having people who have that insider knowledge of what it means to be involved in those systems, what the impacts of those systems have been upon them, and what they would say following that experience about how they should be changed or transformed, they're the best people to do that. And so as much as I try to think about making sure I'm bringing in voices and being in service of communities as a researcher, I'm still driving it. There's still a perspective that only comes from my capacities and my skills and my interests. And so, yeah, it would really be folding people in so that we have leaders among us who have that expertise.
And I think I don't know, I'm richer for, I guess, embracing that. We've done co-production for quite a while now in terms of at work, and it always is just very humbling, but also just fascinating when you get a piece of data that I see in a very specific way through a very particular lens, and then with that you have someone who's got lived experience of that. Yeah, just how rich it is to just have those perspectives. And I don't know, there's just something wonderful about when you look at a piece of data or a set of transcripts and say, what do I see here? What do you see here? So insightful. It's brilliant.
Yeah. And I think what you just touched on really is that question of othering, that at the moment there is an us and them that often happens within the study of the criminal justice system. And something that we've talked about is how we also place silos where we put victims in one and we put perpetrators in another. And that is probably the most frustrating thing I deal with in the criminology world, because it's just not true. And the data is really clear that victimizations are higher among perpetrators than among victims, which seems crazy, because how could you have more victimization among people who aren't called victims? But it's actually the case, and it's the case from childhood, adolescence to adulthood. So there's this revolution that we need to bring in, which for me is tightly linked to the values and principles of trauma-informed care, where we're looking at people in the totality of their experience instead of siloing, labeling, and othering.
And in terms of some of our environments that are just really chaotic, where can we start with that? If trauma-informed care is something that, let's say, an organisation wants to look at or explore more, how do we start that journey? How do they start that journey? Is there any advice that you give in light of the work that you've done?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I don't have a great answer, but what I would say is to see if there's anyone you can partner with. So if it's you guys at Justice 2.0, or if it's a scholar in a university close to where you are, or sometimes there's community organizations who are knowledgeable about this, that the more people that you can bring into your partnership, the better, because it's complex to make change in an institution. And having other people to help think through and help to design how to take the steps is really, really helpful. I think even if you're somewhere in the world where you don't have access to that, there's the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Administration website of SAMHSA, which is free, and they have guidance on there about trauma-informed care and behavioral environments. There's stuff that you can find that's really good advice and a good way to start thinking about what does it mean to be trauma-informed. And what I find is that when we start changing our thinking and understanding about why people behave in some of the ways they behave, it really helps to guide a change in our own choices and behaviors. So we may have to take it one step at a time. We may not be able to come and do a revamp of our whole system. And honestly, that can't happen in trauma-informed care. Like, I guess that's the other thing I would say is, even with the best possible supports, it takes years because you're asking everyone to change their mind about something. So be nice to yourself and understand that it's a process and it'll take time. And it makes me think a lot about, in my own life, or when I'm working with people who are really struggling with changing something that's really, really stuck in them, look at your feet and count your progress with a footstep. Don't look at the mountain peak you're heading for and constantly see how far off you are from your goal. And just ask yourself at the end of each day, did I take a step in the direction I'm trying to go? Or did I at least stop from getting pushed back 10 steps? Or if I did get pushed back 10 steps, do I still believe that I can move in that direction? And to always try to find some way to validate the work that you're doing and to understand how important it is. And maybe that's something Sarah could ask you about, because I know you've been in justice environments that are much more trauma informed than others. And just to give us a little bit of optimism, what is so great about those places? Anything? What changes?
I mean, I change. I think that's the thing, isn't it? That the minute you step into a space, it has a kind of physiological feeling that is different in me. And I kind of think, I've spent some time in Norwegian prisons, but also in some incredible places here where you have particular pockets you walk into. We have pipe units, so they're for kind of therapeutic communities, essentially. But you walk into that space, and the minute you open that gate or the minute you open that door, you feel something in the air. And the only way I kind of describe it is a bit like when I was a kid, I used to go to church, and there's just some kind of feeling. I don't know if it's the musty smell or cathedrals, you go into a big space, you can feel something that's in the air. It isn't necessarily about what's going on in terms of the inspirational pictures on the wall or the plants in the corner or, the different textures of colour or the way in which things have been kind of created within that space. They are all part of it, but there is just something about the energy that people are giving off in that place that is hopeful, and you can't then help but feel that, and I think particularly when I went to Bastoy, I went there to uncover what was it about this culture that brought human flourishing. And as I was in it just changed the way in which I made sense of things, just by the very nature of having the space to breathe and having nature around me and having people I could connect with. It was just, there was just something there that I can't even put my finger on. And that's why measuring it is quite difficult sometimes. We talk about how do you measure the magic? You may not even be able to kind of communicate what it feels like. And on the darker side, I guess, there's also that feeling that you can walk into a place and suddenly feel a darkness about that, right? You can almost taste the kind of trauma in the walls. It's weird. So yeah, I think there's just something there about, if we are going to support reform, and for Justice 2.0 for me is, if we can encourage people to feel that, instead of like the convincing argument, logically, this is going to happen. Statistically, this is the research that tells us that this is going to be good. I think we do a lot of engineering just for an hour. Let's engineer a therapeutic environment and just get people to feel the difference of it. And that might just be about getting people to reflect on, tell me a moment where you felt joy at work. And with that, you feel a room explode with something positive. And then just reflecting on, why is this room feeling different than it was 5 minutes ago? And how we engineered that. And how do you feel about the future? Just by having a very small injection of joy.
I have a question for you. So this is like a hard question, I think. When I did that literature review looking at how trauma-informed care has been implanted in prison settings, and one of the things I found was that the early implantations, sorry, I speak French at work, so implementation is the word I think I should be saying. Implementation, early therapeutic communities, there was trouble with a bunch of them. And sort of what a couple of studies reported was that they took out the rules because there weren't supposed to be rules, because it was supposed to be self-directed and people were supposed to be able to make choices. And what ended up happening in one in particular was it became, the bullies took over, and it was a chaotic getting into that chaos. I was going to use another term, but it wasn't going well.
Yeah.
So what I'm hearing from you is that therapeutic communities have evolved over decades, and that there's something that goes on in some of them that's working really well. What would you say were the changes that occurred to bring it from sort of this stereotype of what trauma-informed care is? How did it shift?
I don't know. It's a really good question. In terms of the relational practice work, it's not necessarily about the relational connection you have with someone, but it's the structure that's around it. So it's about having a shared goal. It's about understanding each other's needs. It's about knowing where you fit within those goals. That structure, that clarity is what drives something forward. So you can have that connection, but if there's something isn't clear, if there's confusion within the structure, then people start taking control of it, right? So your bullies then kick in, and then with that, they take control of it. It's an opportunity. They set the goal, they set the tasks, they ignore the needs. And then with that, you create an environment that isn't, trauma informed maybe. I don't know. There's something about, I kind of see it as almost scaffolding. And I'm not sure that's what happened in, I'm not sure that's what happened in Bastoy, because it seems like Bastoy was almost quite organic. They talk about it as this prison is like an organism. It moves and it shapes and it was set up very much looking at it from a humanistic perspective, but that structure was in place, the foundations were in place, the governance was in place. When something happens, this is how we respond. So there was clarity. There's stuff around team functioning that when there isn't clarity, that shakes up a lot of people. I don't like it when there's uncertainty. I wonder whether it's that.
I think that is such an exciting reflection, and it fits completely with trauma-informed care theorizing will tell us, which is that you have to vertically integrate across all domains of an organization. And when you talk about what are we doing here, I think any human being who thinks, okay, I'm in a room and I'm in this room and I'm stuck in this place for the next 10 years and I can barely do anything and I've just got to survive 10 years. And sometimes it's dangerous. And if I go out of this room, bad things are going to happen. So I got to figure out just like how to get from A to B and how to eat my lunch and etc. Versus I'm here, I'm safe, the people around me care about me, I don't have my freedom because something happened that meant I couldn't. I have time to think about who I want to be, where I want to be, what kind of connections I want to have, and to try to start building those, to think about what I want to do after this and start building my life after this, to think about the things that created this reality for me and to do some healing. you're sitting in the same room.
Mm.
You're sitting in the same room. But if I'm in the left room, I'm going to be scared and probably more violent.
Yeah, that's it. It's about
Yeah.
how are we going to survive, right? In terms of almost like when our plants all move towards the sun, we're all just, what is the survival game here? And ideally, how are we thriving rather than surviving, I guess, in terms of growth work. But I think that's the thing, isn't it? If the rules, the cultural rules tell us it's okay to be vulnerable here, it's okay to be honest about what's going on, it's okay to ask for help here, that's a measure of strength if you do that. That progression isn't about a tick box jumping through a hoop thing. It's about genuinely we're supporting your progression because we care deeply about you and those around you. That intention is different. I think all of our actions communicate, don't they? What kind of culture does this place abide to and live to? And people can suss that out really quickly. If you're sitting in a war zone, it's very, very different than sitting sitting on a beach looking out. And I think the minute you have that congruence, we talk a lot about alignment, everything lines up, the environment lines up and tells us we're cared for. Everyone who speaks to us communicates that we're cared for. Suddenly, that's integrity, isn't it? The system has got integrity. The minute it becomes duplicitous, it's not authentic anymore. I'm saying, yeah, it's okay to be vulnerable, but I'm writing down your secrets to recall you. It's all that stuff, isn't it? Does it match up? And if it's not matching up, and there's too much ambivalence in the system, then people's normal reaction, including mine, would be, I'm not engaging in this. It's not safe enough.
Absolutely. And I think that a lot of people who maybe are looking for a way to understand this might also understand it through attachment. I know we talk a lot about attachment for babies and children. And the whole point of this is that we are wired that when we feel secure and safe, then we can risk trying new things, then we can learn. And when we don't feel secure and safe, we shut down and all of our resources go to survival. And it's the same if you're a newborn, and it's the same if you're 100 years old. And so if we're taking people who have had behaviors that for society are absolutely unacceptable, and we want them to actually make lasting change, then we must provide a secure environment for them. And that doesn't just mean locked in a cell, it means that their felt sense of security is present that will allow them to learn, to change, to have some growth and development. And it's really common sense. And I think, again, we talk about trauma-informed care, and I know for a lot of people, the first time they hear it, they're like, well, what does that mean? And I think for a lot of administrators and people working in the system, it's like, oh, here we go. Here's the flavor of the month, like here's a new thing that we're supposed to learn. And I think a lot of people have a lot of burnout. And I think what I would want to explain is trauma-informed care is actually common sense. And it is a bunch of knowledge that has come from all over the world and from an interdisciplinary perspective. Psychologists and community workers and neuropsychiatrists and street workers and a whole bunch of different professions started noticing the same exact things, but from different vantage points. And then when it had this name to kind of reunite it, everybody came together and was like, this all makes sense now. And so 2 or 3 years ago, a study came out of Harvard from Teicher and his colleagues, and he did a review of what happens to people's mental health if they've had early childhood trauma, developmental trauma, or if they haven't, and they have a mental health outcome. And what he determined was that if you have had early life trauma, which is 60% of people, okay, it's most people, it's normal actually. We think of it as abnormal, it's not. Then you are neurobiologically distinct from people who have not. And the way that you will have the same diagnosis will be different, and it risks being longer, and your suffering risks being higher, because the foundations on which you would base your healing and your later development have been insulted, have been injured. And so before we can expect you to deal with the stuff that's happening now, we've got to go in and help you with that stuff that never got to solidify in the first place. Sometimes it means gaining capacities, physical, psychological, that you didn't have. And other times it means I'm not going to be able to gain those capacities, but I can find workarounds and I can adapt and I can do things slightly differently, and then I can address what's going on right now. So we're advancing quickly in our knowledge, but it's kind of like there's no disagreement anymore. If we have an institution full of people who've experienced developmental trauma, which is the reality that we see in the prevalence rates for people who are incarcerated, and then we butter onto that later life trauma, so what we would call complex trauma, over and over and over again, then their entire system is organized around survival. And if we want to help them to not be organized in that way, because a lot of bad things can result from being organized that way, then we have to provide a secure environment where they feel hope and where they feel like it's something is possible, they can take those steps.
I agree. I think that's wonderful. I think we started our conversation talking about hope, but also I think it is the energy that's going to keep us going, isn't it? It's the energy again that's going to keep us up and keep us moving. And I guess, as we come to the end of our session, one final question in the last kind of moments. What is it that gives you hope, would you say, in terms of all the work that you do? What is it that provides you with a bit of hope, even just 1%?
I mean, I'm lucky to be in my 50s. When I think about the world I was in my 20s, these ideas were not even possible. And when I think about what it meant to be struggling in certain ways back then and what is available now, and now that we understand that resilience isn't about what you have been born with and what you individually have as strength, but rather it's that scaffolding you're talking about. It's you, but it's also your environment. The fact that there has been this change, and then we also see some heavy crime statistics coming down. I mean, that gives me immense hope. And we have a conference every year, and I know people come and sometimes they're really burnt out and they're really struggling. And the first thing I say is, you cannot see us, but we're all around you. There is a net all around you of us, and we are a light like you are doing this work. And the more people that learn about it, the more people will do it, because it's common sense and it works and it feels great. And so watching that evolution is such a privilege, and I can be nothing but hopeful.
I love that. I love that. Thank you so much. Thank you for your time. It's been wonderful to talk with you always.
Thank you, Sarah, and thank you for all the work you're doing. It's phenomenal. It's so important. Thank you so much.
Bless you. Thank you. And folks, if you want to hear a little bit more about Justice 2.0, if you want to connect and get to know us as a community, then just get in touch with us at our website, www.growtransformbelong.com. And if you want to get in touch with us, info@growtransformbelong.com. And we will give you all of the kind of contact details in our blurb as well. So keep going. And thank you so much and all the best.